"Stay away from me," she screamed, yet the sheriff's voice broke. As he drew near, she was left bound in the desert, her wrists cut, her voice raw, and her soul certain no man with a badge could ever be trusted again. But when Sheriff Elias stepped into the dying light, his voice cracked like thunder rolling across the plains. He reached for her, even as she screamed for him to stay away. Was he her salvation, or the cruelest fate yet to come? The cry tore through the desert like a wounded hawk. "Stay away from me," she screamed, her voice cracked and raw. The sound rose from where she stumbled, her dress torn, her wrists bloodied from the rope that had held her. Sand clung to her cheeks, mixing with tears, and her wide eyes shimmered with terror. Out of the fading sunlight, boots dragged across the grit. The sheriff stopped a few paces away. His broad hat shadowed his lined face, but his voice betrayed him, low, trembling, almost breaking. "Ma'am, I ain't here to hurt you." His hand hovered near his holster, not from threat but habit, as if even his comfort brought danger. She staggered back, clutching her arms across her chest. The golden horizon bled into purple night, coyotes crying in the far hills. The desert wind carried the scent of dust and mesquite, sharp against her breath. She could see his badge catching the last ray of sun, dull from years, but heavy with meaning. Her whisper was ragged. "Badges. They left me tied out there." Her body trembled, as though any kindness might still be a trick. The sheriff's jaw clenched. He had sworn to uphold order, yet here was proof that men wearing the same iron star had broken it. A silence stretched between them, thick as smoke. The sheriff stepped closer, each movement deliberate like approaching a spooked horse. He reached out, not fast, not slow, just enough to let her see his empty hand. Her knees buckled, but he caught her before she collapsed, his arms surprisingly gentle. For a moment, the world shrank to the sound of her breath against his chest, and his heartbeat pounding like a drum. She whispered again, weaker now. "You don't know what they'll do to me if they find me here." He lifted his gaze to the endless desert, the stars beginning to pierce the twilight. His voice carried a vow he hadn't meant to speak aloud. "Then they'll have to come through me first." But shadows moved on the far ridge. And the desert wasn't empty. The sheriff's cabin sat at the edge of the cottonwoods, its timbers weathered by storms and sun. He carried her through the doorway, the hinges groaning like a warning. The air inside smelled of smoke and pine resin, a sharp contrast to the desert chill that clung to her skin. He set her down near the hearth where embers still glowed. She pulled her knees to her chest, wary, her eyes darting from his rifle above the mantel to the single iron cot in the corner. He crouched low, pulling a blanket from a trunk. "It's clean," he muttered, laying it over her shoulders. His hands shook just enough that she noticed. A lawman with trembling fingers. She wanted to thank him, but the words lodged in her throat. Instead, she watched as he ladled water from a tin basin, poured it into a cup, and set it within reach. When she didn't take it, he slid it closer, then sat back. The firelight flickered across his face, deepening the lines, softening the steel in his eyes. He didn't ask her name, didn't press. Instead, he busied himself, mending a torn saddle strap, stoking the fire, sweeping sand from the threshold. Each act was simple, almost silent, yet it built something steadier than questions could. She pretended to rest, her eyelids half closed, but she was listening. Listening to the sheriff's sigh when he thought she couldn't hear. Listening to the words he muttered, a broken prayer to no one in particular. "Lord, I can't fail another soul. Not again." The confession struck her like a stone tossed into still water. His grief was a wound he carried openly, even in solitude. She shifted beneath the blanket, torn between fear and the strange safety his sorrow offered. Later, he set a small bowl of broth before her. She stared at it, hunger gnawing, pride resisting. He simply nodded once, then turned away, giving her the choice. She lifted it slowly, the steam rising like forgiveness, and for the first time since the desert, she let herself taste warmth. But outside, coyotes fell silent all at once. A bad omen. Someone else was listening in the dark, but shadows moved on the far ridge. And the desert wasn't empty. At dawn, the sheriff found them, prints in the dust just beyond the cottonwoods. Too many boots for wanderers. Riders had circled, their horses restless in the night, close enough to mark their presence, yet clever enough not to strike. He knelt, tracing the impressions with a calloused finger. The woman lingered in the doorway, clutching the blanket tight around her shoulders. "They're hunting you," he said, his voice low. "Or maybe me. Either way, they know where we are." Her throat tightened. She remembered rough hands, the laughter of men with badges gleaming beneath the moonlight. Shame and fury knotted in her chest. "If you keep me here, Sheriff, they'll brand you as one of them." He rose, brushing dust from his knees, his eyes hardening like stone. "Then let them come." She wanted to argue, but he cut her off with a single look, stern, resolute, and yet carrying something softer just beneath. That softness unsettled her more than the threat outside. It meant he had already chosen a side. Through the day, they moved like shadows inside the cabin. He reinforced the door with timber, checked the rifle's chamber, set lanterns by the windows. She gathered what little she could find: dried beans, strips of jerky, bandages from an old medicine tin. Together they prepared, though they barely spoke. The silence between them was heavy, but no longer hostile. By evening, the woman sat by the fire while he polished his revolver. The flames painted his face in strokes of orange and black, like a man torn between two fates. She finally broke the silence. "Why risk yourself? You don't even know my name." He looked up, eyes catching hers. "Out here, names don't matter half as much as choices." His voice carried weight, but then softened into something unexpected. "And I'm tired of making the wrong ones." The fire cracked, scattering sparks into the air. She lowered her gaze, unsure whether to feel grateful or afraid. Beyond the walls, the wind carried a sound, distant at first, then clearer. Hooves pounding, voices shouting. Riders were coming, and with them, the past neither of them could outrun. Out here in the Wild West, every decision carved a man's fate. One choice could mean loyalty or betrayal. And if this tale has gripped your heart so far, don't ride off just yet. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us. The next twist may change everything. But shadows moved on the far ridge, and the desert wasn't empty. The storm rolled in before the riders. Clouds churned black across the plains, lightning tearing jagged scars across the sky. Rain began as a whisper, then lashed down, rattling the tin roof of the cabin. The sheriff lit the lanterns, their glow flickering against the wooden walls. "Stay close," he told her, his voice low but steady. Then came the pounding hooves, cutting through the rain. 5 riders, maybe more, their silhouettes flaring with each lightning strike. The sheriff's hand tightened around his rifle. He knew those shapes, knew the crooked stance of one rider in particular. Men he once called brothers-in-law. Men who had traded their honor for coin and cruelty. The barn door blew wide under the force of wind and boot. Shadows stormed in, lantern light spilling over wet coats, dripping hats and the gleam of iron. A man with a scar across his cheek spat on the floorboards. "Sheriff," he drawled, "didn't reckon you'd be keeping her warm." The woman stiffened, clutching the blanket tighter, the truth of her terror revealed. These were the men who had left her for dead. She backed against the wall, breath quickening. The sheriff leveled his rifle, though his voice faltered. "You ain't taking her. Not tonight. Not ever." Laughter rang through the storm. One of them kicked over a lantern, flames licking across the floor. Thunder cracked, masking the first gunshot. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and the cabin erupted into chaos. The woman dropped to the ground, crawling for cover. The sheriff fired, each shot a defiance against men who wore the same badge he carried. Smoke thickened, the air sharp with gunpowder and burning pine. Then, in the confusion, betrayal cut deeper than any bullet. From the doorway stepped a figure in a deputy's star, the sheriff's own kin, face grim, voice shaking. "Elias, stand down. You can't fight us all." The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside his chest. Lightning split the sky, framing a moment of decision. Kin or oath, blood or justice, and the next shot would decide everything. But shadows moved on the far ridge. And the desert wasn't empty. Dawn crept slowly over the plains, painting the storm's wreckage in pale gold. Smoke curled from the cabin's blackened timbers, the scent of gunpowder and rain mingling in the air. The ground was scarred with hoofprints, blood, and broken glass. The sheriff leaned against the door frame, one hand pressed to a wound at his side, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. She emerged from the barn, hair damp, blankets still wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes searched the yard, taking in the silence where laughter and gunfire had reigned only hours before. 3 riders lay still in the mud. The rest had fled into the horizon, their shadows swallowed by the sunrise. Her gaze fell on him, and something inside her broke, fear giving way to something fiercer. "You stayed," she whispered, voice raw with disbelief. He looked at her, his face pale but resolute. "Didn't reckon on running. Not anymore." His words trembled, but they carried the weight of a man who had chosen. Kin lay among the fallen, his badge dulled by blood and rain. The sheriff's hand lingered on it only long enough to let it go. She crossed the yard, kneeling beside him. For the first time, her hands were steady as she pressed cloth against his wound. Their eyes locked, and no words could soften what passed between them, gratitude, sorrow, and the fragile thread of hope. The horizon flared brighter, chasing away the shadows. She whispered, "What happens now?" He drew a slow, painful breath. "Now. We live with it." His voice broke on the last word, but his hand found hers, rough and warm. The West had always demanded a price. But in that scarred sunrise, 2 souls, one bound by fear, the other by guilt, found something rarer than justice. They found each other. And out here, where love was scarcer than water, that was enough. If this tale of courage and sacrifice has gripped you, don't let it vanish with the dawn. Like this story, subscribe and ring the bell. Because in the Wild West, every scar carries another tale waiting to be told.